Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Michael Bruntz, Brian Christopherson, and we are here on Wednesday recapping Nebraska's own media day of sorts. On Tuesday, what was it? A dozen players spoke, 4 different coaches spoke. A pretty good media day, I gotta say. Probably, maybe even better than when you guys, drove 11 hours to go to Indy. I'm a little biased. I only had to drive 20 minutes to get to the stadium for this one. But it seems like a good experience all the way around. Does that seem fair, Brian?
Yeah, you got to give Matt Rule credit. It's a excellent thing for us to be able to do that. Not everybody does it. A lot of people don't. So you got to tip your cap on that. And yes, it is better than driving 10 to 11 hours to Indianapolis. Not that we didn't get stuff out of that, but I got more out of yesterday. We're actually overflowing. It was like drinking out of the fire hose, as people like to say. Coaches like to say that a lot. That's what it was yesterday.
Yeah, I realized I was writing those 3 things, and each one of the individual things could have been its own story. It's like, all right, I need to hurry this along. Bruntz, before we get any further, I got to ask you, who's your favorite Arizona Cardinal of all time?
Neil Lomax.
Oh yeah, Rod Tidwell.
No. You're just ready to go on that one.
Neil Lomax, 1980s quarterback, is my favorite Cardinal of all time. Not Kyler Murray, who is a turncoat, but Neil Lomax, former Portland State University Viking Neil Lomax.
Okay, look at that, full of information. BC dropping in Rod Tidwell. I appreciate that. All right, let's just jump right into this. Bruntz, Matt Rule was one of the 4 coaches that spoke yesterday. Was there anything that he mentioned that caught your attention that maybe didn't come up in Indy?
No, there wasn't a ton of new stuff. I mean, we got a little bit of an update on injuries, and the kind of shifting sands of the 120 will be interesting to watch as we kind of go through fall camp. A few kind of noteworthy guys like Tristan Alvano and Brody Tagaloa are not initially part of the 120, but you can move guys in and out as they get healthy, so it's not a big deal. Alvano's not battling. I mean, he's on his way back from kind of an ongoing groin issue. Tagaloa is still coming back from that car accident, is getting closer to being cleared. Was there anybody else that was in that crew that you're kind of like, Maurice Mazuka, who got a little bit of run in the spring, is not part of the 120. Matt Rule mentioned that there's going to be guys who are scholarship players who are not initially or who are not part of the 120. So that'll be interesting for the first open period on Saturday to kind of see who's there and who's not. But that stood out to me. And beyond that, I mean, I think it was a lot more big picture stuff. I don't know that there was anything that he said that was particularly earth shattering to me, but I was not clued in enough to receive the earth shattering things that he said. Was there anything that you guys had that really stood out to you?
Not from Rule himself. I mean, he made a joke about it because he had just spoken to us like 5 days previous. So I don't think there was a lot of additional stuff. The Alvano thing, of course, was the thing that was the headline. And he's going to be back pretty soon. In fact, he's been kicking, he was doing a rehab kicking assignment, and Ed Foley said he came out of it well. Just doesn't have him doing the kickoff stuff yet, where you put your full force into it and some of that. But obviously, that's going to be something to monitor for a team that slogan is chasing 3 and is going to be in a lot of close games. But aside from that, I mean, I think Tony White was interesting.
Before you dive into the coordinators, we're gonna break that up a little bit. So I don't want you to get too far ahead, BC. You're always working a little faster than what I have on my run sheet. All right. Those notes and everything that I put down. Let's stick with Ed Foley before we get into the offense and defensive coordinator. We talked a little about Alvano. What else did you glean from Foley as he kind of walked through the special teams process, where they're sort of at as they're deciding who they're going to rely on in some of these specialist positions?
Try to dig into who the returners could be, like just the names, not saying you have to name the starters. And he didn't give a lot there, but Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, that's been really kind of an intriguing name of the last month to me. That is sort of
divisive on the message boards. You have people adamant that he's never going to play. Which
I think he could be. I think he could be the punt returner at least. He's definitely resurfaced and is a great individual story of how he is not only rehab but reworked his body and added like 10 to 15 pounds. And if you see him up close, it shows. I think he's going to play. I'm not saying he's at the top of the rotation, but the way coaches talk about him, he keeps coming up. And everybody loves saying IGC, by the way. That's like cool if you can be like that sort of guy where you're like, it just like everybody agrees, like, we're just going to call him IGC. Nobody ever calls him Isaiah or, whatever. So I think that's awesome for him that he's got that going. And I think
could you not add your middle name and then people could call you BTC or whatever it is?
Everybody calls you BC. You're already there. You're already cool.
You're one letter short, and he's pretty jealous, Bruntz.
Yeah. No, I'm not gonna go
BWC. BWC doesn't have the same kind of ring.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. IGC is very cool though. And I think he could be the punt returner. Aside from that, with special teams, I think he's got a lot of confidence in Buschini, and that's going to be a big deal. Like if he can, I think we'd all agree, be a little bit more consistent.
Should they have a lot of confidence in Buschini? Matt Rule had a lot of confidence in Buschini on the Pat McAfee show. And I seem to recall multiple Saturdays, particularly in Memorial Stadium, where those punts didn't have much distance. No one was getting pinned. And I don't know. For a guy who's punted as much as Buschini has, I feel that is kind of shaky going into this year. I'm not kidding either. Like I felt like he was a net negative for Nebraska in 2023.
I think he's got something to prove. I agree with that. And he's got the experience. He's got the leg. I know he has the leg. He's shown it in his past. He's reworked his body actually. And I think he thinks that's going to help him. So we'll see. It's going to be a big deal to me for this team. There's going to be a lot of situations where you get in these Big Ten games where you get the ball to the 50-yard line, a drive stalls out. Can you pin a team at the 6, and can you get a 3-and-out and do the whole thing over again and then put it in the end zone? I mean, that's Big Ten football. We make fun of it sometimes, but you got to play that game of territory where you shift the platform so it's favoring you, and then you got to strike, and so he's going to have to be a big part of that. Shift the platform. That's a very popular phrase I just came up with. Platform.
Yeah.
I like it. All right, now we can dive into the other coordinators. We'll jump to Michael Bruntz and we will go to Marcus Satterfield. What did you learn from the offensive coordinator on Tuesday?
Brian, what's your middle initial, by the way? I've been hung up on this for the last 2 minutes. What is it?
W.
Huh?
W.
W? Okay. BWC?
W.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. Satterfield. Well, there was some headset talk. There was a lot of headset talk, I thought, about how they're going to use that, which is advantageous that rule change took place for the in-game communication with a potential freshman quarterback starting. I think Satterfield, I thought, was pretty clipped in his answers. I think that, again, like, they're expecting like a really kind of explosive year over there from Thomas Fidone. Like, going back to last year and some of the comments they made about him, he's coming off of a knee injury, 2 knee injuries. We don't know for sure what we're going to get, and we're going to be patient. It seems like that's all out the window now. Like, they know that they need him to be good and they need him to be explosive. And I think Marcus Satterfield kind of went out of his way yesterday to, again, not double down on the fact that they are expecting a breakout year from him, but they're expecting a breakout year from him. I mean, I think that's kind of the subtext of every time you talk about Nebraska tight ends is, that piece of it has to improve. And, Carter Nelson, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I think he's going to be in there for like, I would be surprised if he redshirted based on their comments and how they're going to use him. So those are kind of my two takeaways. And with Nelson, basically Marcus Satterfield said we're not going to impede his progress and keep him off the field just because we need him to try to block a 6'5" defensive end. Like, I think they're going to be smart about getting him out there, and I think that's the right approach. I mean, if he can get used to things quickly, I mean, you have a legit 6'4", 6'5", 225-pound athlete out there. It would behoove Nebraska to use him if they can.
Yeah, I want to go back to Fedoni because I've gotten kind of stuck on this throughout the month of July, thinking about, if things go well for Nebraska, what does it look like? Have we talked enough about the idea that he's basically been healthy for a long stretch and that we might finally see someone cash in on being the number one tight end in the 2021 recruiting class? Like, I feel like we maybe haven't done as strong of a job. Maybe it's just me. Like, there's a real possibility he could be maybe Nebraska's leader in receptions if he becomes a real safety valve for Dylan Raiola in the middle of the field, especially if teams are so worried about having the top taken off. There's going to be big open portions in the middle of the field for a guy like Thomas Fedoni to go to work, or other possession wide receivers too.
I think Nebraska needs to do a better job of putting him in a position to make a catch and run. Like, in kind of like rewatching some of the games from last season, I mean, there were chances for him at times to, and this is what made him so good, was like not what he did, as a receiver. Like, it was the after the catch stuff where he just really burned guys in high school.
Well, he's faster than you anticipate that he would
right.
be.
And it felt like a lot of times last year he's diving for a ball that's low. It's back over his head like this. It's in traffic. Like, when they put him in a good spot, it felt like that was a pretty good picture and a quarterback could complete that. But that's why, like, I'm intrigued by Marcus Satterfield coaching the tight ends, because I think when you have your play caller dealing with a particular group, you're just kind of naturally wired a little bit to like want to get that group in a better spot. You know what I mean? Like, it just feels like the door is more open for that group this year to do something than what it was a year ago. And obviously improved quarterback play will help that immensely. But I think also them putting him in a little bit better position to make plays will also help as well.
BC, what are your thoughts from what Marcus Satterfield had to say?
Yeah, and one more.
Oh, go ahead.
No, that's okay. One more thing on Fedoni. I mean, he had 260 yards or something with a porous pass offense around him. And I will repeat this. If you look at numbers of Nebraska tight ends in their first year of like playing, or being a starter, the numbers for like Austin Allen and everybody, if you go through them, there was like a slow burn toward their season. Tyler Hoppus is an exception where he popped up that 1 year, but there's always been this like gradual uptick from like 120 to 250 and then maybe one big year. So I think for a first year, like in that, from what we saw from the quarterbacks, I think he could be 450, 500 range. I also think Nate Borkercher is going to have a very solid season. Like, I think he's a guy that people probably aren't talking about much, but he's going to make several big plays. I'll guarantee it in the pass game.
An oddly specific offseason prediction from BC.
I think I would buy stock in Borkercher. I think he's going to have a really good year.
We need to have a stock podcast. That's what we need to do.
Yep.
Maybe next week we're just going to get in here and start talking about stocks that we're buying and selling. I think that's the idea now.
I guess the other thing that stood out, they're confident in their like that the second and third teams on offense are now much closer to their top line guys where there's actual depth, whether you're talking about wide receiver, which obviously last season we saw when the rubber hit the road and you got to like October, November, and you had some injuries, it was like, okay, there's like 3 guys who can play. It was like Billy Kemp had to kind of limp out there to preserve Jaden Doss's red shirt, that sort of stuff. And I think they're past that. They got to prove it. But Satterfield thinks they are too. And they continue to have confidence they're going to be able to throw the ball around. It's definitely they're walking tall with the idea that they've made a lot of progress there and it's actually going to show. And I think most people believe it because I think there's going to be a QB upgrade. But the wide receiver upgrade is probably just as critical. The fact that there's more guys who are going to get open, it's going to make it easier on the quarterbacks. That'll make it easier on the offensive line. And in turn, it'll make it easier on the running backs who, we've always tried to evaluate how good are these guys actually. Maybe it's been tough to tell when the defense knows you can't throw the ball and they can stack the box. Like, it's hard to look good as a running back sometimes. So maybe some of these guys are all of a sudden going to look like second, third team all Big Ten guys. I don't know, but that's going to be an interesting part of this season.
Absolutely. Let's quickly get over to defensive coordinator Tony White for a couple minutes here before we head to break. Then we'll come back and we'll talk about the players and what they had to say. BC, I know we just finished with you on the offensive side, but you wanted to make a point on Tony White before I went all traffic cop and pulled you over and told you that you were going too fast in this podcast. What did you want to say about Tony White earlier?
Yeah, I was like halfway across the crosswalk and you were like taking me by the shoulders and pushed me back, said I'm not doing it. I just like the fact that I think he definitely establishes to these guys day in, day out that this is not like an iPhone where last season transfers over. And I'm not saying those guys are always thinking that, but I do think outside of the walls, there's been this conversation since last season ended and it was known Tony White's going to come back. Well, naturally, they're going to be a top 10 defense. It's like taken as a certainty that that's going to happen. And I think their leader does a nice job of making it clear to them that was a group of 11 guys that is going to be different than this 11 guys on the field. Sure, there's some similar parts, but you got to go prove it all over again. And that trickles down when you talk to the players yesterday. I really think he has an effective way of communicating that message that you can feel throughout the whole roster. So I think that kind of stood out in his talk. Like, we have a lot to prove. And then he says, I have a lot to prove. And I like hearing that from a guy who everybody slaps on the back, but he knows that you're only as good as what your next week is out there.
Bruntz, takeaways from Tony White?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that group at all is resting on what they did last season. I mean, I think a lot of the reason for confidence about Nebraska could be in 2024 is based on what they did last year and kind of what the natural progression should be in year 2. But I don't think I've never gotten the sense over there that group is like comfortable with where they were. I mean, I think they can see
they're still a 5-7 team. I don't know how.
Right. I mean, they're a 5-7 team that lost late in November a lot. I mean, there was a chance
scores to Iowa, Maryland, chances to win games. Yeah.
And so I forget who it was, maybe Matt Rule, but he said basically the difference that he wants the defense to be the reason that the team wins, not the reason that they to basically like win games and not just be good enough to be close. And I think that's kind of where they're at now. I mean, they want to get to 40 sacks this year. That was the goal last year. They fell short of that. They want 20 takeaways this year. They were short of that last year. I mean, I think there's very specific goals that they want to get to, and there's still a lot of room for this defense to grow, even with the same cast of characters largely back. So I know, last spring, the loudest voice and the guy that was doing the most yelling during practice was Tony White. That was very clear that he wants to get every last ounce out of this defense for whatever it has.
If you want to be really candid too, they weren't actually a clutch, as you're talking through that, Bruntz, and you think about the games, they weren't really a clutch defense,
Didn't get the stops at the end.
Yeah. I mean, they can put that right on the dinner menu in front of them. The Iowa game, you play really well, and then you give up that 20-yard run, right? That puts a kid who can't make it from 32 yards, basically, gets it over the crossbar by 6 inches, all because you gave up a 20-some yard run. The Maryland drive, Wisconsin. Yeah, so it's easy enough, I think, to put it in front of them, as like you haven't arrived yet. And so yeah, I don't think they're going to have a problem with it, but I do think the guy leading that defense, Tony White, definitely makes sure of it, as Bruntz pointed out well.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk about some of the players and what they had to say as they sat down for 15 to 20 minutes. It was long interviews. There's some good stuff in there, I feel like. So we'll dive into that when we return here on the Husker 247 podcast. Mentioned that we were going to get into some discussion about the players and who spoke, what they had to say. The 3 guys who were in Indy did not sit down, but we got 12 others who did. And I'm just going to bounce back and forth between you guys. I'll toss in a couple things from the players that I talked to, but we'll start with Michael Bruntz. Of the players that you were around, give me one that stood out and why.
I mean, Tommy Hill's interesting to me. If you value Pro Football Focus, you value NCAA 25. I mean, he's Nebraska's best player right now.
Javen Wright says he's Nebraska's best athlete, and he kind of made it insinuated that it's not really close.
You said that about Tommy Hill?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so Tommy Hill, when he arrived at Nebraska, was 175 pounds. He's up to 205 now, and they list him at 6 foot, which I don't think they're doing him favors there, because he seems taller than that to me. Like, I'm 6 foot, and he was taller than me. So, I mean, he looks like a lockdown Big Ten corner, and whenever you kind of go back to the way that his season ended last year, when you finally got past is he a wide receiver? Is he a defensive back? Is he both? Is he neither? It seemed like he really settled in pretty well. And I think, he took some confidence out of that. I think he's becoming a bigger leader, which I don't know is necessarily a natural thing for him. And, with the kind of shifting pieces at the other cornerback spot, Tommy Hill needs to kind of lock down his area of the field. And, I think that would really kind of help Nebraska as a defense when you start talking about the turnover thing, because at least with him, he was a guy that if the ball was in his vicinity, he was going to at least be able to make a play on it, which hasn't been the case with a lot of Nebraska's defensive backs through the years. So I'm intrigued by what he can be. I think in some ways having John Butler now as his defensive backs coach, I think it has kind of focused him a little bit. I mean, when you have a guy that has coached one of the better secondaries in the NFL now coaching you, I think it kind of focuses you a bit on what your goals are and how to get there. And he kind of talked about that a little bit about that too. I'll have that on the site later today, but he's going to be a big piece of that defense and making sure that turnover takeaway number is higher than it was last year.
BC, give me one player and something you learned from them.
Ramir Johnson. I mean, the thing I would learn in general is that he's got a great piece about him as he heads into his final year as a Husker. Like, he is happy he's here. He's determined and really wants to put out there in front of the fans, who I think fans view him as one of their favorite Huskers because he's been so loyal and been around the program so long. But he wants to put that complete season that shows I am that 2021 guy and beyond, actually. That's who I am as a player. I can do all those things. And he just had a real comfort about himself and like comfort in his skin, like where I'm at. I think he's in the best shape he's been at after his rehab. He actually got back basically all the way from that injury in mid-February. They kind of held him back in spring, and you might remember Rule was always like, Ramir could go out there if we had a game. Like, he would always say that. So Ramir this isn't like a deal where he just got cleared like in early June and let's see how it goes. His body's been in good shape for a while now. And so I think he's he's gonna do a lot of big things for this team, and he'd like to be involved in kick return where he got injured last year too. He's that kind of player. He's like, I want to get back out there if they let me.
I was around Jamal Banks for the duration of his interview, and in the transfer portal era, it's kind of fascinating to think about this. But he arrives in January and quickly assumes a role in a wide receiver room that he's never been in before as a leader, and he knew that this was going to happen. I'm assuming it was discussed on his visit, and he talked about how he and Isaiah Nair kind of took that on because they knew they were coming into a young room. And he's like, we just it wasn't a lot of talk. It was a lot of, we're going to be here on time. We're going to make sure you're here on time. We're going to put in as much work as we're going to ask you to put in work. A lot of it was just your classic lead by example. But I think Jamal Banks is going to be one of those special players who has a lot of value, both in terms of what he's going to do statistically. I think he's going to be a helpful wide receiver for Nebraska, of course. But I think his influence really might come down to how he helps guys like Malachi Coleman along, Jalen Lloyd, Ja'Cory Barney. I mean, he's taken a real kind of shine to working with those guys specifically and to being an asset for them because, as he would say it, he's played a lot of football. He's been in a lot of big games. He's played in big moments and big stadiums, and he feels like he has a lot to give from the leadership side of things. I think that's a really important thing for Nebraska, in addition to what they might be able to get from a guy who, like you said, played a lot of football, played in big games. He's going to be able to help them at that wide receiver spot. As we kind of finish things up a little bit here, because I know we're up against it, I do want give me an anecdote that you learned about Dylan Raiola through another player, because if your experience was anything like mine, a lot of Dylan questions out there.
I don't know that the people I was around were asked about him.
Ah, interesting. Do you have mostly defensive players?
Yeah, primarily. Emmett Johnson wasn't asked about him. So, yeah, the defensive guys didn't really have much to say. So
Nice question, Schaefer. Way to go.
Yeah.
Failed that one. Probably should have included that in the notes that I emailed over. BT, you get any? Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just the people I was around.
Yeah, there was a little Dylan talk. There was an Indy too, if I can cheat. I mean, you got it from from Gifford and Ben Scott, and Ben Scott just saying like he's the first in, last out sort of thing. You get a lot of that, but enough guys have kind of repeated that I take it to be true, that he is always sort of grinding away over there and trying to figure out stuff, and I think probably ahead of his, his older than his years, like in sort of like his understanding of some things. And I think his peers realize that, like how he processes the game. So we'll see in a month or so, but I think they kind of feel like he's going to take off and do pretty well. That's what I gather.
Jamal Banks used that exact phrase, older than his years, as BC did there. He also went to great pains to say several different times, whoever our starting quarterback is, and then proceeded to talk about Dylan Raiola exclusively. Banks had a lot to say about Raiola and just sort of, his nature of coming in and working. I mean, I think that's what he really appreciated. This is a guy, again, for coming from a different program, you hear about a 5-star quarterback. I think his expectation of what Dylan was going to be and how Dylan had acted, he basically said that he's been a guy that he's been really impressed by how humble and the humility that Raiola has as he goes to work, and sort of how he challenges everybody else to try to be at that level too. And so I think Banks really appreciated that. Also enjoyed from Teddy Prohaska at one point in the offseason, Dylan Raiola took all of the offensive linemen to Isles Pub and Pizza. If you've ever been to Isles Pub and Pizza, it's not a big place. So to take the offensive line there, pack that place in, he paid the entire bill. Teddy said they ran it up on him. They're offensive linemen. You're at a pizza place. They went to town on the pizza and the wings. But Dylan Raiola has, I think, done a pretty good job of just sort of making sure that he is visible, and that he's also trying to be a leader, even as a freshman who has yet to take a snap in college football.
I wonder how many leaning towers the Husker offensive line, all of them would go through.
Prohaska said that in his experience, generally what offensive linemen are doing are ordering a large pizza for themselves, eating half of it, then taking the other half home for later that day or the next day. So I don't know how many Leaning Towers were purchased, but I anticipate quite a few large pizzas went out the door that night.
That's the way to win a lineman's heart right there. Food.
Yeah,
and anybody's heart, really.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add real quickly before we close up today? Bruntz?
No, I don't think so. I was just looking at the 2019 recruiting class, and we're finally gonna put a bow on that one this year. As Brian was talking about Ramiro Johnson.
That's Bryce Benhart, Wandale Robinson. That's that group.
That crew, Ty Robinson, Benhart, and Ramiro.
Who's all left?
Just those three. Those are your three. Miles Farmer is still kicking it around at Appalachian State, I know. So he's the only other, I believe.
Went up against him in NCAA 25. He picked me off and ran it back for a touchdown.
He'll do that.
His younger brother did the same thing next year. It was quite remarkable.
Wow. There's some names in that class, but those are the ones who are going to have a lot to say about this year. Kind of interesting.
BC, anything else?
No, nothing that needs to be said. We got a lot of stuff coming on our site with everything that got said. We'll have plenty of content over the next 4 days, so people should come on over. There's a good deal, right, too? Camp deal, 60% off. People should jump on that.
60% off your first year for the next 5 days. So jump on it now.
Look at me selling cars like that. Yeah. You see that?
Yeah.
That was nice. That was very smooth, particularly referencing it again there. Good work there from BC. I just want to say real quickly, I'm sure people are already a fan of this guy because they know a little about his story. But Javen Wright has gone through so much. I mean, he ran through his list of injuries. I had forgotten about the labrum surgeries. I mean, we're talking MCL tears and ankle tendon tears, blood clots, labrum surgeries. And all he does is just wants to play football. And he said he'd never considered going anywhere else, never considered quitting. He's battled back from a lot of injuries. He feels very healthy. He's a guy who spends a lot of time in the film room. He seems like he's on the one-way track to being an assistant coach, maybe at a place like Nebraska. Just a very, very bright football mind, an easy guy to root for, and someone who could be a bit of a breakout player in 2020.
I think so. You talked about Rule's quote earlier, Bruntz, about, this being a defense that wins games. Like Javen Wright could be like at the top of the list if you talk about that's going to happen, a player with that type of dynamic skill set who could do that, he could be it.
Yeah.
So he's definitely someone to put a gold star next to on your program or your roster as we go forward. Put a gold star next to Husker247.com. Bookmark it. Put it into one of the places you visit every day. Come visit us at Husker247.com. Jump in on the conversation. A lot happening on the message board as well. BC mentioned we've got a deal going right now, 60% off of your first year. If you want to get in as an annual subscriber, great time to do so. We have plenty of recruiting coverage going on. Nebraska had a big recruiting weekend. We didn't dive into all of that here on the podcast. We can get into some of that more. Certainly, there's plenty of coverage of it at Husker247.com. We'll have plenty of practice coverage coming up. Wednesday, first practice day. Friday, first media availability after practice. Saturday, the 1890 open practice. A lot going on with Nebraska football, so Husker 24/7 is where you want to be. We will catch you next time with another Husker 24/7 podcast.